John Cameron Fraser.
Chet Huntley. David Brinkley. John Chen. Tom Brokaw.
Exit strategy. President Bush says pulling U.S. troops out of Iraq would be a terrible mistake. Tonight, what are people in Bush country saying about the war these days? After the storm, the long road back. 3 months after Katrina, we are back where our coverage started, the Superdome in New Orleans. And tonight, while most residents are still struggling to recover, this city is telling tourists to come on back. True confessions. On tape, an al-Qaeda terrorist admitting he plotted to kill President Bush, and that wasn't all he wanted to do.
This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from New Orleans.
Good evening. We are broadcasting tonight from inside the Superdome in New Orleans, and we are standing on what used to be the 50-yard line, inside what still is the largest indoor arena in the United States. The artificial turf here has been torn up. The roof has been repaired after Katrina damaged 70% of it, and the cleanup and fix-up here continues. This is the first broadcast of its kind since the hurricane from inside this structure. We first arrived here 3 months ago this very day, the morning of Katrina. Conditions then were already bad, and what followed was a genuine human tragedy. People died in this building, and later we will check in on the recovery effort. We are going to begin the broadcast here tonight with the news of this day, and once again it had to do with the debate over the war in Iraq, specifically the president's pledge that U.S. forces would be able to stand down when the Iraqi soldiers can stand up for themselves. Our report tonight from NBC News Chief White House correspondent David Gregory.
The president today touring the U.S.-Mexican border in El Paso, but talking about Iraq back.
Quitting is not an exit strategy. It would be a formula for putting the American people at still greater risk. It would be an invitation for more terrorist violence.
Opposition to the war. NBC News, Denver.
And let's return for a moment to that war of words over the war in Iraq, the debate that flared up when Congressman John Murtha, a veteran Democrat and a decorated Vietnam veteran, called for the U.S. to get out of Iraq. Last night, we found mixed feelings in Murtha's own congressional district. Tonight, we measure the sentiment in a very different area, Republican Mark Foley's congressional district in Florida. Here with that, NBC's Mark Potter.
In the most conservative district in South Florida, NBC News, Stuart, Florida.
They're not going to leave.
And now to the situation here in New Orleans, and the following may just be the best way to illustrate how many people have left this city. There are more seats here in the New Orleans Superdome than there are 24-hour residents of New Orleans. Before the storm, the population of this city used to be just under 500,000 people. Today, only about 60,000 people live here. The cost to rebuild this city may run as high as $200 billion, and it will take tourism for this place to survive. More on that effort tonight from our NBC News New Orleans bureau and correspondent Martin Savage.
3 months. The NBC News, New Orleans.
And earlier today here, I caught up with the man who became one of the emblems of New Orleans' troubles to the millions of Americans watching it all on television. Mayor Ray Nagin is trying to rebuild this city while also running for re-election. He says he fears a kind of Katrina fatigue is setting in Washington and elsewhere. Are you making enough noise? Do you have noisemakers on your staff? Do you feel like shouting from the mountaintops? And do you believe the country's moved on? Is there a fear?
We're shouting. I'm in Washington. I'm up in Baton Rouge, talking to anyone, screaming, whatever it takes to make sure. We have people that are helping us. More New Orleanians are getting involved. Is it enough? Has the country moved on? I think the country's moved on to a certain standpoint, but I think as more people start to understand the importance of New Orleans, as that reality hits home, I think people will turn their attention to help us.
Have you identified your mistakes?
I've analyzed, to some respects, what I could have done. There are 3 things I would do differently. The first one is I wish I had called for a mandatory evacuation earlier, and I had gotten the word from the National Hurricane Center. I would do that differently. The second one is the buses. Everybody saw the images of the buses. Most of those buses were school board buses, but the buses that the city of New Orleans controls, I had those in the area that didn't flood ever, and they flooded again. So I would probably stage those out. And the third thing is everything we designed was assuming that when the big one hit, after 3 days, the cavalry would come. I'm not going to depend upon the cavalry next time.
Mayor Ray Nagin from earlier today. We should point out the tourism loss alone is costing this city $1.5 million a day. And in March, this city's current line of credit will run out. And we should note that tomorrow marks the end of what has been the worst hurricane season in history. That's official. Here are just a few of the stats that are just out today from the experts at NOAA at the federal government. 2005 produced 26 storms big enough to warrant a name. 13 of them reached hurricane status. 4 of the storms considered major made landfall in the U.S., and 3 of the major hurricanes were as big as they ever get, Category 5. And as you'd expect, it was the costliest and deadliest year for hurricanes in this nation by far. And in the Plain States tonight, they are dealing with weather of an entirely different variety, digging out from the first really big winter storm of the year, the worst blizzard to hit parts of that area in 10 years, in fact. Thousands of post-Thanksgiving travelers were stranded. Thousands more lost power. Holiday travelers weren't the only ones stuck. Trucks were stopped all over the highways in the Dakotas and Minnesota. The good news tonight, most of the major highways have reopened. Up next from here this Tuesday night in New Orleans, NBC News In Depth. The Superdome, this building then and now. The scene of so much misery and suffering. How's the cleanup here going? And what does the future hold for the survivors of all of this? Then later on, a remarkable piece of tape, the confession of an al-Qaeda terrorist who plotted to kill President Bush. And we are back from the Superdome in New Orleans tonight. This was the scene of massive human tragedy back when Katrina hit. This was the shelter of last resort. If you couldn't leave New Orleans, you were invited to head here. And when people arrived and they closed the doors on this massive arena, things started to happen. And we were here from the start to cover it. This once proud symbol of the city now stands for something else. And it all started that morning 3 months ago today. On the day Katrina hit, once the winds picked up and made reporting from outside the dome impossible, we moved inside where the evacuees who had spent the night were already suffering in the dirty and dank facility. That's when the roof started to go. The storm.
That photo a second ago, and we've been showing it to our viewers, and you know what the photo looks like. Try and describe what we're looking at.
The brightness you see is, in fact, daylight. With this roof open, I just saw someone walk down one of the aisles in the stands with an umbrella.
As the damage can again, it's been 3 months. 3 months. It's good to see you.
Same here.
This was a powerful trip back for Albert. The memories here are powerful.
Every spot here represents a different family.
And in many ways, the Superdome is unchanged. In the hallways, the wrappers from the military rations are still here. In the stairwell, there is... Albert Bryan is a proud husband and father. He has a master's degree in social work. He is plotting his comeback in San Antonio, even though he has been unable to find work since Katrina. And by the way, the Superdome is plotting a comeback of its own. They are vowing to reopen 1 year from now in November of '06. There is a big question mark about who will play here on this surface. They are very worried about their football team here, the New Orleans Saints, and rumors they may move to the West Coast. Up next here tonight after a break, a chilling and controversial confession video from a convicted terrorist who said he wanted to kill President George W. Bush. Again tonight in Iraq, the Arab television network Al Jazeera today broadcast a video of 4 Christian peace activists, 1 American, Tom Fox of Clearbrook, Virginia, along with a British citizen, 2 Canadians, all of them kidnapped this past weekend in Baghdad. Their captors call them spies. A second videotape shows a German archaeologist held by a different group. Now, a senior official who is working to free all 5 people is telling NBC's Richard Engel in Baghdad tonight that these hostages were easy targets because they all traveled without personal security. We have a rather stunning piece of videotape to show you tonight. The confession of an American citizen who was convicted just last week of plotting along with al-Qaeda to kill President Bush. Here with that, NBC News senior investigative correspondent Lisa Myers.
And U.S. law enforcement is left to wonder how many other Abu Alis may be out there. Lisa Myers, NBC News, Washington.
On Wall Street today, stocks finished slightly lower. The Dow was down 2.5 points on the day. The Nasdaq lost just under 7 points. There has been a passing to note tonight. Stan Berenstain, the author who created the Berenstain Bears, has died. For over 40 years, in more than 200 books and on public television and DVDs, generations of children have taken the Berenstain Bears into their own families and turned to them for help with everything from a new baby in the family to that dreaded trip to the dentist or doctor. Stan Berenstain was 82 years old. We'll be right back with more from New Orleans in just a moment.
NBC West.
Finally tonight, a word about the parts of this city not visible to the rest of this nation. From the air, New Orleans, and this whole region for that matter, looks like a sea of blue. The locals call it FEMA blue, the plastic tarp material that covers the roofs of so many houses. And when you fly over at night, you see the other reality. As much as this city wants to stress the services that have been restored, there are entire areas still plunged in darkness, no power, no lights for 3 months now. The U.S. is at war, the holidays are coming, Americans are very busy, and a whole lot of people in this entire region of the country want others to know life is still a daily struggle in this part of the world. That is our broadcast for this Tuesday night from the Superdome in New Orleans. I'm Brian Williams. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you tomorrow evening from the lower 9th Ward section of town. I'm Brian Williams from New Orleans. Good night, everyone.
Next.
David John Cheney.